Well, good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome here to the Lucis Trust and Global Meeting for Meditation and Reflection, the period leading up to the new moon. It's of us here in the office, just across from the UN in New York, and I know we'll have a large number of you, all sorts of places online on Zoom. So let's just for a moment quietly sit together and we'll have a moment of silence and then we can use together the mantra of the New Group of World Servers, the 5 o'clock mantra that we use so often. So let's just sit for a moment together. May the power of the one life pour through the group of all true servers. May the love of the one soul characterize the lives of all who seek to aid the great ones. May we fulfill our part in the one work through self-forgetfulness, harmlessness, and right speech. Thank you. And just a reminder that the new moon takes place at 5 a.m. Eastern time here in the US on Sunday. And that's just after the clocks have moved forward 1 hour to daylight saving time. So Sunday's the big day, everyone moves the clocks. There's much to ponder when we consider the significance of this new moon. Pisces is a sign of the role that bondage and liberation play in the relationship between soul and personality. The story of the development of the incarnated human self is very largely throughout all its time the story of this relationship. And exactly the same thing can be said about the development and evolution of nations and of peoples, and indeed of humanity as a whole kingdom in nature. Soul and personality are these 2 points of identity. For the individual and for the nation, they often seem to contradict each other. And yet, they're held together by an unbreakable bond to form one developing, evolving whole. This bond that holds the two together throughout the evolutionary cycle can be experienced as a gift or as a curse, symbolizing imprisonment, which then opens out to a struggle for freedom, and finally, which symbolizes freedom and wholeness itself. Everything about this depends on where the consciousness is identified. And at different key moments in the history of nations, it's often possible to identify and see these 2 aspects of the national psyche held together in states of tension and stimulation, which are always times of terrific possibility. The United Nations has now been in existence for over 75 years, and one of the deeper impacts that the UN is having on human affairs is that it's facilitating new ways of looking at the world and of seeing what's actually possible in the future, in the short term and the long term. The UN really reflects a process of reorientation of the collective psyche. In September this year, just a few months away, governments will assemble in a summit of the future at the UN here in New York. And while this will in obvious outer ways likely be more of a ritual with high-sounding words than a practical negotiation of needed reforms to, for example, restructure the Security Council, the actual process leading up to the summit has already become a hugely energetic space where reflection and consideration of possibilities is taking place in a lively manner amongst different national and global institutions and throughout the civil society organisms that have been formed by the new group of world servers. After all, the UN is essentially a space, or we could say a forum, where nations come together to manage their ever-increasing interdependence. And through this space, through this sort of field of thought, new ways of thinking are slowly developing about the two primary poles of human identity. The fact that every individual and every nation and every culture is part of one life and one humanity, where everything relates to everything else. And the parallel fact, apparently contradictory, of the integrity and sacredness of every single individual human being, as well as every community, every nation, every culture, every language group, and so on. These two poles of identity, reflected in all the intensity of the relationship between unity and diversity, global and local, can be understood as the duality of the two selves of Pisces, a duality that must go through all the necessary conflicts and crises as old patterns crystallize to such an extent that they shatter, and the bondage or imprisonment of these old forms can begin to be transformed, and steps forward can be taken on the path towards liberation, freedom, and right relations. One of the ways that in which this can be seen in the UN is through the series of observances agreed to by governments of the world. Official UN international days, weeks, years, and decades reflect humanity as a species, a kingdom of nature, beginning to think about the issues as they affect the human species as a whole. This is historically a very new thing in the whole history of human consciousness. We're beginning to be able to think about issues as they affect the species as a whole and as they manifest differently in different sections of humanity and affect the lives also of individual human beings. I believe that the calendar of UN observances can be viewed as a symbol of a developing universal consciousness in nations and peoples. And so today, for example, people all over the world are observing the UN's International Women's Day. And on Sunday, which is the day of the new moon, there will be events and ceremonies, perhaps often more sober and formal, to mark the UN's International Day of Women Judges. And then on Monday next week, just after the weekend, the 68th session of the UN's Annual Commission on the Status of Women begins its 2 weeks of meeting at UN headquarters here in New York. These Women Commission periods at the UN, for anyone who ever travels, goes to the building of the UN headquarters here, during that period, the whole atmosphere of the entire building is transformed, with thousands of women from all over the world coming together to reflect and think. This focus on women and the empowerment of women in relation to men is very much a part of the shift that's occurring in human relationships. And so it's not surprising that it's so strongly reflected in all the negotiations and processes that are constantly being debated and discussed and reviewed at the UN. Women and men reflect such a basic duality in human identity, and the nature of the relationship, the growing awareness and sensitivity of how unequal and in some ways poisoned the relationship between women and men has been throughout history, and the gradual crafting of pathways forwards towards right and balanced relations between the sexes, are really central to the dynamics, the energetics, the tensions, and the potential for our time. And it's not just about all these policy things of having more women on this. That's a part of it, but it is a much deeper thing of a whole new balance and consciousness emerging. The theme for Women's Day focuses on the idea that investing in women accelerates progress for all. And the main theme for the Commission on the Status of Women concentrates on the idea that the empowerment of women and girls is critical in efforts to end poverty around the world, emphasizing that this empowerment of women involves every aspect of work that's done to end poverty. The deeply embedded economic structures that lead to the divide between extreme wealth and poverty, and the financing of projects to stimulate development, and the strengthening of institutions that foster human development. All of these issues are beginning to be looked at through the perspective of transforming the relations between men and women. And at every level, it's been shown that empowering women produces positive results throughout society. As one way of thinking about this and to sort of focus our energy for this new moon meeting, it's useful to look at a recently published book by Dr. Mae East, What If Women Designed the City? It just came out in, I think, about a month ago. As some of you will know, Mae is a student of the Ageless Wisdom and a long-term friend of World Goodwill and the Lucis Trust. She's spoken several times at seminars and conferences, most recently at the New York World Goodwill Seminar in 2021. As a pioneering thinker and practitioner in regenerative design, Mae is deeply involved in development work in communities all over the globe. At the heart of this new book is the understanding that the gender gap in urban planning is best approached as a potential to be realized rather than a problem to be solved. In other words, and this is fairly central to all regenerative thinking and certainly to Mae's thinking, that when we look at issues and we just see problems, or when we look in urban areas and see them as problem areas, like there's a whole section on the slums, the favelas in Brazil. Mae is originally from Brazil. When we look at them as problems, we see one thing. But when we look at them as places of diversity and therefore of enormous potential, we see something else. And as Mae mentioned in her talk at the seminar, the more we do this, the more we make it possible for serendipity to start to come in the way we see things, the way we organize, and the way people's lives change. Drawing on in-depth walking interviews with 274 women, Mae identifies in the book 33 leverage points where change can take place and where they're like points of tension in an esoteric sense. These leverage points that are discussed in the book range from the very pragmatic, such as how cities would look if pavements were built, public transport was networked, alleyways were illuminated, and neighborhood funds were distributed. It also looks at the influence that shifts in mindsets, distribution of power, and rules of the system might have in democratizing the way women and girls use and experience public spaces, suggesting that the future of humanity and the biosphere will be decided by the way we choose to evolve our cities and towns in the 21st century. Mae writes that it's the city, not the state, that may well become the nexus of economic and political power. For in many cases, city officials are responding to transnational problems more effectively, and this is not surprising, than nation states, which are caught up as they are in geopolitical rivalries. This book, she says, emerges at the intersection between two megatrends informing the world we live in. women's repositioning in society, and the accelerated pace of urbanization. It builds upon a series of recent documents and reports by UN agencies, the World Bank, and OECD, reaffirming that historically, cities have been planned and built primarily through taking the male experience as the reference. And as a result, cities tend to function better for men than they do for women. The thoughtful engagement with citizens to redesign cities so that they work as well for women as for men is surely one of the signs that the great ideas of the Aquarian Age, which are increasingly impressing humanity, are in process of taking shape as ideals, and that these ideals can guide us as a new civilization is being designed and as we participate through our lives in the designing of that new civilization. So let's do our real work for the evening, working with this meditation, strengthening the hands of the new group of world servants. And then after that, for those of you who want to stay on the Zoom call, I hope you will, we can begin to have this an open conversation on some questions that have already been circulated. Right, too. So, so group fusion. I am one with my group brothers, and all that I have is theirs. May the love which is in my soul pour forth to them. May the strength which is in me lift and aid them. May the thoughts which my soul creates reach and encourage them. Alignment. We recognize our place as a group, and we see that within the heart center of the group of world servants. And from the center, we together mentally extend a line of lighted energy towards the spiritual hierarchy, which is the planetary heart center. To the Christ, the heart of love within the hierarchy. And we extend that line of light toward Shambhala, where the will of God is known. higher interlude. Hold the mind focused on the planetary role of the group of world servers, mediating between hierarchy and humanity, responding to hierarchical impression, and meditating the plan into existence. Meditation. Reflect on the seed thought. Through the impression and expression of certain great ideas, humanity must be brought to the understanding of the fundamental ideals which will govern the new age. This is the major task of the group of world servers. Precipitation. Visualize the precipitation of the will to good, which is essential love, throughout the planet, from Shambhala, precipitating through the planetary heart, the whole substance of the hierarchy, through the Christ, the group of world servers, through all men and women of goodwill everywhere in the world, and through the hearts and minds of the entire human family. Over interlude. Think about the many ways in which the power of the one life and the love of the one soul are working out in the world through members of the group of world servers, and in the process are building the thought form of solution to world problems. Distributing these energies. As the great invocation is sounded, visualize the irradiation of human consciousness with light and love and power from the point of light within the mind of me. Let light stream forth into the mind. I'm sorry. From the point of light within the mind of God. Let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God. Let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center, where the will of God is known. Let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center, which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Thank you, friends. Thank you for that piece of work. Remember that the new moon is on Sunday at Sunday at 5 a.m. And so now let's chat. Let's think together. We're a group of people, some of us from all different parts of the world. I'm sure there'll be people of all language groups, although we're all working in English. But it will be interesting to hear the group's thoughts on these questions. One is, why has the empowerment of women become such a central theme in humanity's transition into the Aquarian age? What's the reality is that has happened? What's the significance of that? What's it mean? And while we're thinking about that, what role, if any, does the focus on women's issues play in the developing sense of human unity? Does it advance the principle of freedom? This is something all of us will be thinking about because it's so much a part of our life today, wherever we are, whatever our environment, whether we're men or women. So if you want to share a thought and you're online, can you raise your hand? And raise your hand, and then we'll bring that into the discussion. Those of us in the circle here. The microphone, which I'm very happy to. Oh, okay. Okay. Look, you should have seen the play here. I'm sorry you couldn't all see the play here, but there were little points. No, no, that one. No, that one. I have to do what?
Kath,
I'll
Jacqueline, go
stop.
ahead.
Are you speaking to Jacqueline?
Hi, Jacqueline.
Hi, this is Jacqueline Pogue. My very quick response when I saw the question of the empowerment of women being such a central theme, I think it's the humanity's larger body of coming into a balance of both those energies of the masculine and feminine energies coming together. And that since the energies of women have not been valued in general as much in society and culture, more emphasis has been focused on power and materialism and various other things. I think that women are a natural aspect of the feminine within each of us. And that women, as women came into recognizing their oppression earlier than men, I actually believe that more men need to have a men's movement of what is their internalized oppression as a result of the direction society and culture has taken them. But since women were more oppressed overtly, it became upon women to move into that awareness sooner. So I think that it's essential because it's bringing in more of the balance of the inner feminine, which is more receptivity, more heart balanced with mind, more awareness of emotions as an aspect of an expression even of our spiritual life, not just our intellectual life or emotional life. So I think it's a central theme, partly because there are actually technically a few more women in the world than there are men, birth-wise, so that we have numbers. And that as more women awakened, they had more access to communication, to the media, to the world, to make their statements of their new role that they were taking on without apology, without pretending that we just needed to be quiet and in the backseat and do things behind the scenes, which has been a theme of women also. So I think it's a central theme because it's part of evolution itself. And it's also part of the plan. May the plan of love and light work out. That requires a balance in all of us of energies and of awakening. And so whether we're awakening on a political level of oppression, or whether we're awakening on a personality level of taking a power, or whether we're awakening on a spiritual level of the real essence of being souls, not even just being women or identified in a small way with our body form, but being aware that we are part of the movement of change for more and more people to come into the soul consciousness, the deeper place. Women typically go there through the heart. So I think I'm saying too much now. I realize I'm talking a lot. Sorry. But
No,
anyway,
Jacqueline, I don't think that's too much at all. I think that's a beautiful expression of what do others think. I think that's beautiful, Jacqueline. Thank you. That's really so clear and
thank you.
Gianna Rosa, go ahead and unmute yourself.
So I think that women issues and just justice for women and just recognizing their dignity and their role does advance the principle of freedom, because it's a matter of building and making alive a new thoughts form, just breaking the old thoughts form of a patriarchy, which is oppression, not only for women, is oppression for men, oppression of everybody, even for men being imprisoned in this thought form of dominion, violence, and separation. And so just recognizing, just making, just building the possibility of a new thought form of women, a new image of women, just more free, more involved, and more participating in power, in just the leading of the society, is just an affirmation of unseparateness and just a glimpse of the realm of soul. And so it's really an just a realization of the plan.
that's beautiful. It is related. I love that bringing in the plan because it does. That's how it seems to me that it's an expression of the plan, and it's been going on since, like, if you just look since the beginning of the suffragette movement around the world. These things take so long, and we want everything to suddenly change, which is sort of unrealistic because, like, I want myself to change and be this really aligned perfect being, and the self isn't, because the self's got work to do, and so it takes time.
Takes time. Patriarchy took millennia. It cannot just be destroyed just in a couple of generations.
Exactly.
Robin, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, currently in the United States,
Robin, we can
there's a
barely hear
focus-
you. If it's possible to speak up.
hang
Sorry.
on.
Before you get started, yeah.
How about now? Is it better?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it better?
It's
Okay.
only a little bit better, but I think it's probably going to be good enough. So why don't you, well, you can go ahead, I think.
Okay, I'll just move closer to the computer. Okay, in the United States right now, there's a focus on women's bodies and a level of ownership of women's bodies by some men who want to control the right to reproduction. And just as I think that the earth is often thought of as female or feminine, the earth has obviously been handled, I guess I could say badly or handled roughly. And I think now we're beginning to understand that we want to work in concert with the earth. And I think that we women now in the United States really do need help. We need help to be strong and reassert ourselves, because it looks like in our country, we have to work very hard now to keep our rights. And we're on a perilous path currently. So I do believe that we're going to need more energy. We're going to need to have our women be a focus, and a focus of strength and a focus of power. So thank you. I hope you heard me. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much.
I just have a few thoughts to share. The first being that any sort of major movement like this, no matter what your opinion is about it, the women's movement, as somebody just said, spanned over a millennia. It's definitely a great spiritual impulse. We can imagine extending far beyond the human kingdom, much greater than obviously ourselves as individuals, but even much larger than ourselves as humanity. And so however you feel about the women's movement or the subtleties of that question, I think we can all hopefully agree that there's a great spiritual impulse behind what's happening with regard to the relationship between the sexes. And we can only imagine what that's going to look like in another 100 years' time, when perhaps the great purpose behind that movement is even more obvious to us. But I just also wanted to share a second thought, and that is that, when we're talking about the women's movement, and I hope I just want to preface what I'm saying by I don't mean to sound insensitive to the women's movement at all, but just in an effort not to really censor what I want to say, I'm just going to sort of come straight forward and say it. But
Go for it.
but no, but I do mean, with all the respect to the women's movement, and I understand that it's very, very terrible things have happened to women, and it's very natural, I think, the process of liberation that's gone on now, and it's definitely a huge part of the plan. That everything that's happened, and even the process that many women are still going through today. But if you think about this in terms of right relationship between the sexes, Steve, you started off your talk by talking about the polarity of soul and personality. And it's an important polarity, but we learn in the esoteric teachings that in addition to that polarity, the soul being the higher point of that polarity, the soul is also the mediating point of every polarity as well. And so just thinking in terms of right relationship between the sexes, I did want to say that I do take some issue with the characterization always of everything masculine being evil and everything feminine being divine. And I think it's understandable, but I don't think that sort of tendency to do that is leading to a true right relationship between the sexes. Obviously, we know there's a relationship between the sexes on the physical plane in human society, but it's a much larger archetype. And we can look at those archetypes, whether, whatever system you believe in, there's all slight differences, of course. But you see these universals that are so beautiful and so transcendental. And we can imagine one day the relationship between the sexes, like representing that, is just, it's sort of unimaginable, the beauty and wonder of what that would mean for spirit and matter to be brought together in the relationship of two human, not two human forms, two human beings. We're living systems, each of us. We're not just a thing. So we can keep that in mind. Yeah, thank you.
Follow on to what you were saying, because you were kind of expressing something that was underlying what I was thinking, which was, when I think about the history of humanity and I think about the emergence of the plan over time, it's hard to ignore the fact that primarily, well, I don't even know if I want to put it that way, but that there have been great minds that incarnated as men for, whatever reason, and they were able to contribute so much to humanity in a very exalted way, and to push the evolution of humanity forward. I'm not saying that there were not women up in that, because obviously wherever you look in history or in the world, men and women are working in concert together to bring things about. In the past, the roles were very, very rigidly defined according to gender. That was the way it was, for good or ill. That isn't like the point that I want to make. But I think that the point I wanted to make was the sense of appreciation that I feel for the things that are called quote unquote masculine in the past on the positive side, yes, there's the negative stuff. There are the wars and the abuses and the aggression and the fighting. There's all that. But there's also a lot of selflessness on behalf of humanity to bring in new things. The fact that, I mean, I can tell you that the building that we're in right now was probably not made by a woman. You know, it was a men's bodies that made these structures, and how beautiful they are, right? How functional they are, how much they help us do our work today at a level that would not have been possible millennia ago, right? So I just want to remember that appreciation, even though it's time for things to change. It is absolutely time for things to change, but here we are.
Emmanuel, go ahead. There's a hand raised. Emmanuel, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Beautifully.
Thank you. Talking about the women issue, it's quite interesting that Madame Blavatsky was a woman. And she started this Theosophical movement in the West. Annie Besant was also a woman who championed and continued the work. So was also Helena Roerich, who was also a woman who championed, who brought another aspect of the work to humanity. And finally, Alice A. Bailey, so far as we know, was also in a feminine body. It looks like the women are able to somehow invoke or make alignment so far when the time has come for the teachings to be given to humanity. So maybe in the long run, when we look in perspective, we shall see the great contributions that women have made. Also, since for the occult students, the soul incarnate in a feminine body and in a masculine body, we don't know the rules in terms of how many times as a female, how many times as a male. But if the plan is to be consummated, and if the work is to be done properly, and souls are going to incarnate in feminine bodies as well as in masculine bodies, then we can see, as Michael put it, that there is a great spiritual impulse which is manifesting in the women movement all across the world, so that the soul will have an equal conditions to manifest as a feminine and as a masculine, because the oppression of women only hinders the progress of the soul if we look esoterically, just as the oppression of men will also hinder the spiritual progress of the soul. And the soul, being the mediator, implementing the plan, needs to have right conditions to work as a woman and to work as a man. So, like Michael said, there's a great spiritual push to bring about fairness in treating the sexes across the world. After all, the soul is the very center of relationship. And for the soul to have demonstrate that relationship through a masculine body and a feminine body, the women movement must come to a great success. Paying for past imbalances so that the one work will go on successfully. Thank you. I'm done. Hello? Okay. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. We're just experiencing some technical difficulties. We'll be back in just a moment.
The emergence of, a really holistic, cooperative sense within the group. So maybe that's why there have been so many souls choosing female bodies to deliver that message at this time. You know, in integral theory, they talk about agency, which is the masculine tendency versus, I can't remember the exact word, but it's something to do with sort of cooperation or relationship, relational. And I can think of so many different examples of how that. Remember when I was living in Scotland, they in the 80s, they were trying to create housing for lower income people. And they thought, oh, you know, we're going to build these big high-rise towers for people to live in, create lots of great housing. And they didn't take into consideration the culture and the community that they were building the housing in, and the natural way in which Scottish were above the third story. So what happened was this house, they would do the third story in these 25-story apartments, built a whole sort of city, like co-op city of these buildings, but they didn't put in pubs or grocery stores or anything where people have a sense of community. And I think the symbol of a building going up and up and up, like here in Manhattan, is just another example of the masculine energy versus, you know, something that kind of creates community and connection. So that's just one other little thought I had to share.
Thanks so much, Steve, for bringing this topic up. It's obviously creating a lot of discussion. There isn't too much in the teachings overtly on this subject. But there's one phrase that I always, when this topic comes up in ageless wisdom circles, that always comes into my mind. And I think it's a very curious statement. And we don't really know what the answer to the statement is, but the Tibetan does say that in the future, it's not so much a change that women need to make in terms of their relationship with men, but he said that there has to be a change in their relationship to their own destiny. So you have to ponder, like, what is the destiny of women? And in that same place, he does say that men do need to change their relationship with women, their attitude towards women, but women need to change their attitude towards their destiny. And I think that because of women's need to be heard and recognized and appreciated, there's been a little, perhaps in my view, a little bit of a less focus on pondering what is the destiny of women. And instead, women often have attempted to become achievers in the world of men. And I think the Tibetan is indicating that there's another type of achievement and appreciation that has to develop in relationship to the special role that women hold. And I do think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they give birth to children and that they raise children predominantly. Not that that is necessarily right. And I think part of the change in the future will be that men will be much more invested in child rearing, which I know is happening in the younger generations, but to have a deep, as long as they have a deep appreciation for what it means to give birth and to be a mother and to be a woman, you know, just to accept that on a really deep level and move out from just equating women with men. There's a special destiny for women.
Yeah, I think that's, and in a way, probably the deeper thing of what's happening is that, in a way, that women, it's interesting you brought up Scotland, Maya, and because May, one of her homes is in Edinburgh now. She was in Findhorn, she's now in Edinburgh, and she works very closely with the city council in Glasgow and Edinburgh. And there's excerpts from the book about the urban planners in those two cities. And speaking about the role of woman in terms of actually a woman's agency, which is more like what that idea that you're speaking of, Kathy, of women having their own unique perspective on the priority to be given to children, to relationship, to human family, whatever that might mean. And what interests me in this book is to see how that much deeper approach is starting to seep into sort of planning of urban environments, maybe in small areas now, because it's now more a question of sort of experimenting and listening. But you can imagine in 20 years' time that will be quite big. And although the outer side, the sort of political side of the women's movement of getting structures, which this book is very much, it's not against it so much as saying that's not what really this is about something much deeper. And the other thing is, May uses a word, which is something she's developed, called presency, which combines agency, which really relates to what you're saying about the mission, a woman having agency as a woman, combined with presence, with being present, which is really this whole restorative idea, really, is to be present to an environment, to be present to a community, and within that to have agency. And so it's quite an esoteric thing, because we can imagine that in our work, all of the esoteric workers from all the different traditions in the world are very much alive now, and are providing a vehicle where mind is being impressed from higher mind and from hierarchy. And that is seeping into planning. It's seeping into areas in which of human organization. And that sort of, to me, is how I read this word presency, which is presence and agency. So friends, so thank you. It's interesting. It's and in a way, to me, we've tuned into one of the deep meditations that is going on through the decades in our lives, and we have agency in that meditation. So thank you, friends. The next, the three spiritual festivals begins with the Easter festival. The Aries full moon is on March the 25th. It's at 3 a.m. for those of us in Eastern time, Eastern Daylight Time. It'll be at 3 a.m. And you're very welcome to the Easter Festival Full Moon Meditation Meeting, which will take place on Sunday, March the 24th at 3 p.m. And let me remind you, and I hope it will be lovely for people it's always so lovely when you hear of people making an investment in attending the Arcane School Conference. I love to hear from that. Making an investment, in other words, people who say, look, I'm going to make that trip to New York. I'm going to do all of that is involved in that, to be present with others, to start to see this family of esoteric workers that is a group on a level of consciousness, and to see how it's incarnating in so many different people. And the only real chance in our work that you get to do that, particularly in this Lucis Trust sort of network, is coming to these three school conferences. So we have this really wonderful program that I can see that the group has devised here. For New York, it's so Saturday, April the 20th, Sunday, April the 21st, Arcane School Conference with a keynote. Let the group dedicate itself anew to the service of the coming one, and do all it can to prepare human hearts and minds and hearts for that event. We have no other life intention. How is that that energy which has been at the heart of this work since its beginning, how is it finding living expression today in our minds? School conference, April 20th, 21st, New York. Find it on the online. Thank you, friends. Good evening.